Okay, so we're going to talk about territory mapping for SDRs. Now, I made a previous video talking about territory mapping specifically for account executives. So what I'm going to do is do a bit of an intro, and I'm then going to pan to that video because that video is essentially the same content that you need as an SDR. Territory mapping, prospecting, operating rhythm to some extent, these are all translatable skills, right? So whether you're an SDR, an account executive, an SMB account executive, commercial, enterprise, a lot of this stuff is very much the same because it's foundational sales knowledge that you need for any go-to-market activities. So I'm going to pivot over to that and dive into that content over there. For any of you that have just dialed into this video with no context, this is part of a broader series for SDRs or SDR readiness. So there is my team should have a link down below. Go download, don't download, open that link to the playlist on a separate window or a separate tab and just watch all of the SDR readiness series, okay? That will help make your life easier because you'll know what you're walking into and how to do what you need to do to be successful SDR and become an account executive. So go ahead and do that, but continue watching the video. Let's get into it. This video, we are going to be focused on territory mapping. Now, you might potentially look at this and go, why should I freaking bother doing territory mapping? Like, I don't need to do that. If you are spending time with the wrong accounts and you are reaching out to the wrong people, what that will lead to is you're going to find yourself in sales cycles wondering, why the hell am I even speaking to these people? Why am I not winning deals? Like, all of this stuff is going to come up for you, right? And the quickest way to get ahead of that is by focusing on the right accounts and knowing what your messaging is, which is why I'm a huge supporter of doing this activity of mapping your territory properly. Now, to make your life easier, what I've done is I've actually literally mapped these steps out. Like these steps work because this is the exact framework that I used when I was at Gartner, when I was at CrowdStrike, when I was at Zscaler. And this is the ideal process. It is a little bit tedious, but it is the ideal process so that you have a great foundation to work off. So what we're going to go through today is a couple of different elements, and I have a couple of different tools that I've pulled together and stuff that I've put together that can actually help you synthesize this and make sense of this, right? So we're just going to dive straight into it, and if there's any tools, I'll make sure my team includes links below so you can access them and use them, okay? So there's 7 steps to mapping your territory. Step 1, what is your defensible product differentiators? Step 2, what are the pain points that those differentiators solve? Step 3, the use cases tied to those pain points. Step 4, the personas who own those use cases. Step 5, the firmographics that matter. Firmographics are firm traits, and I'll show you what these are. Step 6, technographics that matter. Step 7, you tier your prospects, okay? So I'm going to go through this in some decent depth. If you do want like the full kind of max depth version, which is going to be a little hard for me to cover all in one shot on a long form YouTube channel. So if that's the case, I do have a separate mentorship program with all of this mapped out, like content, tools, etc. I'll try to give you a lot of this for free because I don't believe in hoarding information. But for sort of the full version, just feel free to book a call with me down below. We can have a chat about whether or not any of that stuff is useful for you. But plug aside, let's get into this stuff. The first thing that you want to start with, and a lot of people get this wrong, is they do not understand what their defensible product differentiators are. Now, you're probably looking at that and going, well, what do you mean defensible differentiators, right? Differentiators are different to defensible differentiators. Normal differentiators are things that differentiate you from other vendors in the market. Defensible differentiators are the things that no one else can recreate, or if they want to recreate it, it's going to take them a long fucking time, okay? So it's very important to understand what your defensible differentiators are as a company, because everything kind of flows off the back of that, right? So The next thing that comes off the back of knowing what your defensible differentiators are the pain points that your differentiators solve. Now, I'm giving you some theoretical stuff here. I've actually outlined a real life example of how I did this when I was at CrowdStrike. So I will take you through that in a second, but I just want to kind of walk you through what these areas are. The pain points, so step 2, the pain points that your differentiators solve. This is so important because when you know what pain points your differentiators solve, you know what you are looking for. Okay? The biggest challenge with a lot of reps that are stepping into new roles or they're selling is they're not able to see the correlation between what is the pain my customer faces and the thing that we do so well that no one else does, and marrying that up. That's where you get the dollars. That's where you get the money, right? At a bare minimum, even if you're still trying to work out what you do really well, because you got to look at the market and have a few sales cycles and maybe lose to a few competitors, win to a few competitors, you want to at least at a bare minimum know what you guys can solve for, what pain points, what things the customer shares with you that you go, oh, like we can solve that really well. Like I know that pain, I understand that pain. The next part is the specific use cases tied to those pain points. That's more into the weeds, and I'll show you what that looks like in a practical example to bring it to life. Step 4, this is so important, personas. Who are you trying to sell to? Who are the people that own those use cases / pain points? Right? There's people that are responsible for solving problems in every organization. Your goal is you need to find the CEOs of your problems, right? So not the CEO of the company, the CEO of the problem. There is someone who wakes up every morning in the company that you're trying to sell to, or a number of people that wake up every morning and their only jobs are trying to fix these problems, right? You got to find those people. Step 5 is the Firmographics. Firmographics are firm traits. So examples of Firmographics would be headcount size, headquarter location, base of operations, right? It could be characteristics of certain organizational traits. So it could be like, do they have a cyber team, right? Like, so when I was selling at CrowdStrike, that was one of the things I looked at is how big was their cyber team? Did they have a really deep, well built out cyber team, or were they low in cyber headcount maturity, which indicated one of two things for me. Either they had an outsource model, or scary part, and great for me at the time, they had like no cyber model. They had no cyber response. They were so immature, they were completely screwed if something bad happened, right? So these are the traits that indicate that this company could be a good company to chat to. Another one could be, are they in regulated industries, right? What vertical are they in? That sort of thing. Step 6, technographics that matter, right? So your technographics are things like, so when I'll give you another example. When I was at Zscaler, some of the technographics that were important to me was, did they have extremely critical private applications that they hosted on-prem, right? Were they using VPNs, right? If they were using a VPN and they had really business critical applications on-prem, then if someone compromised the VPN, they were basically screwed. Other technographics for me would be, were they Microsoft shops? Did they use Azure? Did they use AWS? Did they have GCP? Did they have multi-cloud environments? Like, all of these things were really good indicators for me, where if I saw an organization have those kind of technographic traits, then I was really starting to pay attention. 7th step, you take all of that, you create your tiering framework so you know what tier 1, 2, and 3 looks like, and then you tier your prospects. Anything that is a tier 1, that is a must-win account. You're really focused in on those. Anything that is a tier 2, that's like a wild card account, right? Could be good, could be bad, not sure. Like it could go either way. Those are good accounts to use your SDR on, right? Those are good accounts to get over to your SDR. Tier 3 accounts, you just don't even touch them. Tier 3s are terrible fits. Right? Worst case scenario with tier 3s, you maybe give them a call. You give them a single call. See if there's some value there. Maybe flesh it out a little bit. It could turn out to be a tier 2. You can bump it up. I mean, I've had situations where I've tiered an account in tier 3. I mean, not very often, very rarely, but I've tiered accounts in tier 3, and then I've called them and I'm like, holy shit, actually, you're not a bad account. Like, I misjudged some of the things about you. So again, what I say there is, this is a good start, but it's not a hard and fast, but this will at least give you some focus. And you need focus when you're in commercial account executive land, because you could very quickly go down some rabbit holes and waste a bunch of time and end up on a performance plan because you haven't done the work. So let's get into a practical example of what tiering looks like. So this is my market positioning and tiering framework document. I will get my team to include a link down below where you can download this asset and then match it up with the video and go through this exercise yourself. But essentially what I've done is I have broken it down into those 7 steps, right? So step number 1, what is your defensible differentiator, right? Now, as an example, for CrowdStrike, what CrowdStrike is done really, really well. I don't know if they're still doing this really well, and I don't know how much the market has caught up. I know the last time I checked, Sophos was up their ass, and like Arctic Wolf had moved into the region, like a lot of different players that were quite sophisticated within that whole EDR, XDR space had moved in. So I don't know how that's changed, but when I was selling it, their moneymaker, their defensible differentiator was their ability to do end-to-end remediation, cyber response on all endpoints, cloud, laptops. I think mobile is now live as well, but they were able to do that like so well, 24/7, 365, and they were able to remediate within 27 minutes, right? So that, for anyone that's not in cyber, you're probably wondering, like, what the fuck did he just say? Long story short, that's really good. Like, that's actually so good back then that it was like impossible for anyone to do, right? So what I did is I basically outlined all the defensible differentiators over here. I'm just going to go through like 1 or 2 of them as an example, because this is quite like extensive. When I did this the first time, which is still kind of this version, but maybe a couple of iterations before, like I did go quite deep, and it's important you do that. So then what customer pain points does that solve, right? So if I say the ability to conduct end-to-end remediation with no handover, well, the pain point to solve is the pain of a cyber breach or widespread incident because that customer is unable to effectively contain a breach themselves, or their MSSP is unable to conduct end-to-end remediation, resulting in outages and business impact. So then I looked at what use cases are tied to that pain, right? So the use cases are cyber incident detection and hands-on remediation. So then the question is, who in the company you're targeting owns that use case? So for me, at that time, it was a SOC manager, it was a SOC analyst, it was an infrastructure manager, it was a head of IT in smaller organizations, right? So like I'm basically working down, and I'm like, down this chain, and I'm just answering those questions, right? Build these out individually, by the way. So go 1 so you can really get deep, and then you can start to build down. Then here is the moneymaker. What are the relevant firmographic traits based off these differentiators, right? So I've said it over here. Think about what factors such as firm characteristics and industry characteristics might indicate they might find massive values in your defensible differentiator. So for this one, I was looking at it and I was going, well, anyone that has a small or no internal cyber function, right? So if they don't have an internal cyber function, then likely, they probably don't have much cyber maturity. They probably face this pain point, and they're probably going to find this defensible differentiator pretty useful. The next one is the infrastructure lead or the network lead has to double up and handle cyber as well. And I saw this a lot, right? It kept coming up as a repeated theme that infrastructure had to handle cyber. But you think about it, that's not infrastructure's job, right? Most infra guys can do some rudimentary cyber stuff, but like if we're talking like a sophisticated nation state comes after a healthcare organization, like you're kind of screwed, right? Like, if you have PCI, PII type information, I remember one organization, it was a court system, right? It was one of the court systems. They were sitting on confidential informant details. Like, can you imagine the level of fucking cyber risk those people would be facing, right? And so if their infrastructure lead or network lead had to double up as a cyber person Jesus Christ, that is a lot of pressure to put on a non-cyber stakeholder. Like that is serious pressure, right? So these are the firm characteristics. So likewise, I looked at other firm characteristics. So if we take defensible differentiator of, so CrowdStrike, for example, offered a breach warranty. So I still don't know if they're still doing this, but back when I was selling it, they had a breach warranty. That was like one of a kind. No one had a freaking warranty, right? Like no one in cyber did any kind of warranties, guarantees. Like there's just too much risk to take on. CrowdStrike did it at the time. So what pain points did that solve for the customers? Well, higher cyber premiums, right? If they had really high cyber premiums, if there was some way to offload risk to a vendor, that brings premiums down. What use cases were tied to that pain? Well, we had a breach warranty backed by AIG. And so what personas would find that use case useful? Well, head of risk, for one, CISO/cyber manager, head of IT, even CIOs, right, at the time. What would be the firmographic traits, right? Well, you think about anyone that was in a regulated industry, like banking, financial services, healthcare, for example, highly regulated, they had to have cyber insurance. Most of them are regulated to have cyber insurance. So they would probably be pretty interested in this. So that was a firmographic trait I was looking out for, right? So anyways, you work down this and you can find out the firmographic traits. Now, I also had a column for technographic traits. Now, at the time, I put that as optional, right? For me at the time, it was optional. That may not be optional for you. In fact, I'm going to remove the optional because it should probably be mandatory depending on what you're selling. So, the example of how to use technographics, right? So I'll give you a conceptual example. One of my mentoring students that is in the program right now, they sell an Azure DevOps backup solution. And so a technographic trait that is going to be a no-brainer for them is, do any of the customers they're selling to have large Azure environments, or are they developing on Azure, right? Like that's just like a textbook. That would be a textbook technographic trait that they would need to keep their eyes out for. So that is how you go through and map out your firmographics and technographics, right? Now, once you have that, what you want to do is you want to start mapping out what your most important traits are. So you have trait 1, trait 2, trait 3, trait 4, and trait 5. So for me, I realized my most important trait to look at in terms of firmographics, I'm not looking at technographics so much in this one, but in terms of firmographics, what I would be looking at for me is, do they have an internal cyber function or cyber manager? Right? So if they had no internal cyber function or cyber manager and the whole onus of cyber fell on IT, and so the CIO was kind of responsible and a bit of a quasi-CISO, that was a very good thing for me, right? Because I knew that their cyber maturity was pretty low. The next trait is, did the onus of cyber fall on the infrastructure or networks team, right? So if that's the case, again, they're probably really overworked. Right. The next thing is the trait 3 was I was looking at sectors. Are they within highly regulated sectors? Aged care, healthcare, banking and fin services, manufacturing or tech sectors. Right. So those are all the sort of sectors that I was looking at as being higher risk. Trait 4. Do they have mandatory cyber insurance requirements, right? And then trait 5, I put this as an optional for me, was do they have a dispersed workforce or a lot of locations? That was just kind of a wild card trait that I looked at, but really I focused on these 4. So my ideal customer, right? My ideal customer had no internal cyber function or cyber manager, so the onus of IT rolled straight up to the CIO. 2, infrastructure and networks were likely looking after cyber, which was great for me because they were probably overworked and undercapable or understaffed, overworked, not capable of doing it. 3, they fell within one of my target sectors. And 4, they had some sort of mandatory cyber insurance requirement. Fantastic. That is a tier 1 account. I want to be going after them, right? They're going to be a lot more receptive to me, in theory. So in terms of tier 2s, right, they're less ideal but still relevant. here are the traits that are important, right? So I basically said if they had a cyber manager but no analysts, so they didn't have much of a team, but they did have someone that looked after cyber, that probably told me that they were either reliant on a managed services provider, and at the time, most local managed services providers were pretty crap. I'm sorry if you work for a managed services provider, you do security services, but at the time, CrowdStrike just had such a mature service. It was just better than anything that any local provider could offer. So that was an indication for me. Two, the cyber manager is responsible for response through internal stakeholders in the network or infrastructure team. So even though there was a cyber manager, they were still reliant on like the infrastructure and network guys to get shit done, which was another good thing for me. Or they had a third party, but that was still a good thing for me because the third party was still crap. And then they were within the healthcare, aged care, banking, fin services, manufacturing, energy, or tech sectors, right? So again, high risk sectors. The trait that I'd sort of ruled out here is they didn't have mandatory cyber insurance, right? So there was organizations I saw that were within some high risk sectors, but they didn't have any sort of mandatory cyber requirements, or they just didn't bother, right? Like I knew a lot of providers or a lot of companies that were just self-insured. So and they didn't have a very dispersed workforce, right? So that's totally fine. I'd bucketed that as a tier 2 account. Somewhat mature, but still pretty immature. Tier 3, I basically said, they were super mature, right? So if I saw a company, they had a cyber manager, multiple analysts, very mature cyber setup, like they had their shit together. They probably had a lot going for them. And so in those situations, I would still speak to these accounts, but I didn't prioritize them massively, right? Like I had a bit of a different play for these accounts. Like I would do more of a technical sell. I would try to sort of talk about tool efficiency, provide them the best tooling they can. I didn't talk to them about any of our managed services. I just had a different approach for them. So I bucketed them as tier 3 accounts, right? And then some of these other factors didn't match as well. So for example, they were like a retail provider. They weren't really in those sort of really perceived high risk industries where I just knew they wouldn't really take things to that degree. They didn't maybe perceive things as serious. Like anything that sort of didn't look like it had that ideal profile for me, I bucketed into tier 3. I made that a bit of a wild card. I would still call them, but I didn't sort of prioritize them, right? So this is how you go through and you build out what your tiered territory map looks like. Now, from here on out, it's pretty straightforward. What you want to do is go into this one over here, right? And go through, and I've just got a bunch of random company names over here, but what you want to go through is essentially take the account, have a look at what vertical it fits in, where is it headquartered, the headcount, is it private? Is it public? By the way, these are all adjustable. Like punch in the details that you want to punch in here. So maybe headquarter and state isn't really important to you. Maybe whether or not it's government or non-governmental is not important to you. I always made that delineation because, a listed company versus a private company versus a government organization, they all had different risk profiles. So I did pay attention to that. That was also one of my factors. Business modality, I'll come back to business modality. Then add in any additional firmographic traits over here. So, you might put in here, like for me at CrowdStrike, I put in internal cyber manager. Yes or no? Did it have an internal cyber manager that I could find on LinkedIn? Yay, nay, etc. And maybe for you, another one that you could put in here is, let's go back to my example over here. What did I do? Let's go back to my example over here. I could say cyber insurance requirements, right? I could maybe put in cyber insurance requirements, or I could say dispersed workforce. Basically, whatever your additional firmographic trait is that's not covered here, put that in there. This is the tedious part, but it is worthwhile you doing it. Go through and actually fill this information out. So if you have about 100 accounts, you can get this done pretty quickly. It might take you a couple of days, but it's totally worthwhile. You can probably use AI to speed a lot of this up as well. So you can punch it into AI and just say, hey, give me a company headcount, give me a location, tell me if they're listed, tell me if they're private or public or government. You can do all of that, right? what you can also use it to do is you can find out the business modality. So what the business modality is the business in growth, maintenance, or decline, right? Are they profitable, making money, have been making money? Are they in maintenance mode where profit really hasn't done much for a little while? Or are they in decline? Are they stagnating? Are they going backwards? This is an important one as well. I kept an eye on this. Typically companies that were in decline, that were losing a bunch of money, and you can find this out pretty quickly. You can punch in a company's details, chuck it into ChatGPT, and ask it to tell you, is this company profitable and how have they been growing over the last 2 to 3 years? And that will very quickly tell you, are they in growth mode? Are they investing in shit? Or are they declining, right? So go through, fill this out, and then that way you can start to figure out what tier of account you have. Now, something that I haven't spoken about too much in this sheet is I do have a section for Technographics as well. Now, Technographics, you can see here, I've got a fair amount of information, and this was kind of tailored to me when I was at CrowdStrike and Zscaler. This really depends, again, on the nature of your business, the nature of the software you sell. If you are, say, for example, tied to Azure, like you're really, like your solution is great for anyone that has Azure, then I would probably find out, do they have Azure, and stick that in here, right? So there's different ways you can go about finding that. You can probably find that out. There might be some sort of online tool that you can use that would scrape and tell you if someone is consuming Azure or if someone's consuming AWS. I'm not too sure what that tool could be. But there's definitely tools that you can use. Alternatively, if you work for a company that is partnered with Microsoft, you can probably send a list of organizations to your alliances or your channel partner rep and just say, hey, can you just tell me which of these is a Microsoft customer, which of these is AWS customers, so that I can start to tier my accounts and then start to focus on which ones might be a good fit, right? So Technographics, again, I've sort of kept this a little loose just because it's case by case. It's case by case. But it's good to know what it conceptually means, and if it is useful for you, then you can use it, right? Anyways, I hope that was useful. Go through this activity. I highly recommend this. This is such a good way to get a great understanding of your own solution, the problems you solve. You start to develop a lot more customer empathy, and you'll sound a lot more credible, right? So when you pull this together, the next time you're maybe speaking to a CISO, you're able to then start to empathize with them a lot more, right? You're able to come in with a much higher level of conversation because you've done the work to understand your company and what a good company to sell to looks like, right? So anyways, hope that was useful. Like I said, this is part of a broader series where I go into mid-market or commercial account executive readiness. So that playlist should be in the description below. Binge watch those videos, take tons of notes, download these assets, use them. If you need additional help or you're really stuck or you're struggling, happy to help. Book some time with me. My team should have a link in the description below. We can hop on a call and have a chat, and hopefully that'll be useful for you. Anyways, I will see you on the next video.